Today we're joined by my friend Natalia. She has a great little tattoo on her wrist here that I'm going to show you how to cover up. Now, we've already checked for her allergies. She's okay with allergies. The thing to note with tattoos is, even though this is a black tattoo, the pigment actually, if you look at it, has a lot of blue to it. So knowing that and what we know about color theory, we're going to use something that has more of an orange base to actually correct the color in it, as opposed to just taking skin tone and putting it on top of it, because that will only conceal instead of correcting. So the first step we want to do is we want to clean the skin off. Taking a little bit of alcohol on a cotton pad, we're just going to clean the area of the skin to be covered. This ensures that we remove any excess oils or any excess lotions or anything that may be on the skin, so we get the best possible outcome. Now, depending on how you do this, we're going to be using airbrush, but the same exact thing can be done in a hand-painted way. It just depends on what you have on hand. So don't fret if you don't have an airbrush. Just do this exact same thing with brushes and with sponges at home. It is important to note too, if you're doing a color correction for a tattoo that is on a large area of the body where there's a lot of body hair, it's going to be very hard to work around the body hair. Thankfully, she doesn't have hair in this inside area of her wrist, so we don't have any hair removal to do here. Just know that if you are meant to be covering a tattoo in an area that has a lot of body hair, you will want to shave it prior to doing the covering. Otherwise, you get makeup all over the hair and it just looks strange and it doesn't look natural at the end of the day. You'll also be fighting with that body hair to get through the cracks of it instead of being able just to paint flat on. If you're doing a tattoo cover-up, chances are you want it to be lasting for a very long time. Now, choose products appropriately for that. We use airbrush, and I'm using airbrush for this because it is a very long-lasting, durable formula. The pigment that I'm using is an alcohol-based product, which will last the longest. It's similar to the Skin Illustrator palettes that we've been using. If you are doing something that's meant to be just for a quick photo and it's not going to be rubbing against any clothing, things like that, you can certainly use products that are not as long-wearing and as heavy-duty as these. It's just important to know what you're doing the cover-up for. Keep in mind also, if you're doing a tattoo cover-up, say anywhere in this inside arm area, that arm will be rubbing against the side of wardrobe, so having the most long-wear products you can and doing sealants on it so it rubs as little as possible against clothing will be very helpful for you. The wardrobe department will also thank you. Now, to start the cover on this one, we've prepped the skin by cleaning it with alcohol to free it of any moisture and oils, and we're going to be using this coral adjuster. So we're going to take and shake it a little bit before we go in. This coral adjuster from the Temp 2 pack has a lot of orange background to it, but also has some skin tone. So it's going to give us the balancing that we want. And you don't need too much of this, so when you're pouring paints also, don't fill the cup all the way up because you'll just be wasting product. Unless you're custom blending colors to create your own, then it's wise to fill the cup up a bit more. But if you're just using one shade, you can always add more back in. After we have the pigment in there, we turn the gun on. Just feeling the air to make sure it's flowing properly. Now we're going to adjust this PSI again, turning it down a bit. For the face, if you're using this on the face, you want it to be a lower PSI, but the body can be a bit higher because it's not as delicate as the face. I'm going to find the level that I like, which is somewhere in the middle, because we're doing this correction for color here, and we're only doing it on top of the actual black area itself. We're not going to be putting this all over the entire area because we're color correcting. We're only correcting the part that needs the actual color corrected. Before I go on the skin, I'm just going to test on a paper towel to make sure that the color is flowing through properly. And it's also testing the PSI to see if you like what level it's at before you go onto the skin. Okay, I have it to a level that I like, so now what we're going to do is move on to the arm, and we're going to just trace around the wording on here. There you go. Thank you so much. So the gun is going to be pointed pretty straight down for this. and just work slowly. Now another thing to note with the airbrush gun, the closer you are to the skin with the actual gun itself, the more concentrated the product will be. So the further you are away, the more dispersed and wide the range will be of the spray, and the closer you get, the more dispersed it will be. The goal when you're spraying the airbrush is to make it so that it's an even application. You don't ever just want the product to be focused on one area for an elongated amount of time, because you don't want it to pool up and look like it's wet on the skin. Remember, it's an airbrush, so the finish should look like air on the skin. It shouldn't have any wet pockets, anything like that. So adjusting where it is and the relation and radius to the skin is important. And you'll see I'm just taking my time and lightly tracing around all of this black area. You also want to work in layers, just like anything else. You can always do one layer, let it dry, go back, do a second layer, let it dry, go back and do another layer. You don't have to focus on getting it done in one full sweep. It should be a slow buildup of coverage to get the most natural finish. I do find it much more popular that you will be covering tattoos up versus adding fake ones, though they both are fairly frequent in the production world. But knowing how to cover a tattoo, in my opinion, is a much more useful skill than knowing how to apply the fake tattoos, because you do see it a bit more frequent. Now, a little hack you can do to this machine if you want to get more concentration of where the air is actually going is you can take this little tip of the airbrush off so that the needle is exposed. Now with this, be careful that this needle, you need to make sure that you are not bending it or dropping it or anything. That's part of why this little nozzle is here, is to protect it. So make sure that this goes in a safe place, which I'm just going to put it right next to our paints. I'm going to take a little bit more paint while I'm over there as well. And this will give us a little bit more control and a little bit more of a clean line to it, which is good for tracing script writing. Now you'll see, this is after the first pass and the first covering. You still see some of the black coming through, which is okay. We're gonna go back over some of those areas that have a heavy amount of pigment still showing and just give a light little dust on top as well. Okay, now we've completely color corrected the tone from the blue. Remember, there's blue undertone to that black pigment, so we're balancing it and bringing it closer to skin tone by adding the orange. I'm going to put the tip of this back on to protect the needle, because we're also done with the precision that we were using that for. So now what we're going to do is clean this gun out and put a close to skin tone color but slightly darker in here and spray a layer on top of that one. Because there's a little bit of pigment left in this cup, I'm just taking a Q-tip to absorb a little bit of it before I go in with the cleaner. This is important to note too, when you're going in between colors, you want to make sure that you clean the airbrush out, that you're not just mixing foundation color in with the coral adjuster. Otherwise, you don't have an accurate color that you're using. A lot of artists will keep multiple airbrush guns on hand, so that way they can have one for warm colors, one for cool colors, one for skin tone colors, things of the sort, so it's easier to flip back and forth between and you don't have to spend the time cleaning. But when you're working just on yourself and practicing, one is enough for you to get used to it. When I'm cleaning the gun, I like to turn the PSI up pretty high just because I find it goes a bit faster and cleans a little bit better. It is good to do this in a well-ventilated room, as with most of the other products too. This is a lot of alcohol, which the smell will dissipate, but it's always nice to have the ventilated room if you have the option. Or having a fan on or a window open can help as well if you don't have ventilation going. Added more alcohol and we're still bubbling a bit. I like to bubble a few times in between the cleaner just to make sure that it really gets everything. And make sure too, you see when you're bubbling, it can spray out of the cup like that. So make sure you're not doing this over top of your actor or even close to yourself too, especially if you're bubbling paint in there. It can spray up on you, it can spray on the actor. You don't want to do that. So just keep it away from everything so if there is a spill, it's not hurting anyone. Now that the gun is running clear, and there's no more alcohol lift in here, we can go ahead and mix our skin tone colors for her. So when you're choosing the skin tone, first you're going to determine what the undertone is. If you look at her, she has a very obvious warm undertone. You see the presence of a lot of warm yellows, some oranges, some nice glow to the skin. So we already know that she has a warm undertone. So when we're choosing our foundation shade to put on her, we're automatically going to go to a warm tone to match the rest of her. Now it's important too to test the shade before you actually put it on top of the tattoo. So I'm going to test the shade in about this area of her skin because we can always wipe that off and it doesn't affect the tattoo. So testing it on there before you actually put it on will save you from putting the incorrect color down and then trying to adjust it later, having to wipe it off and start over, things like that. Just going to give this a good shake here. I might have to get a darker shade, I don't know yet. So I'm going to try a couple drops of this shade that I have here, see how it goes. I think I might need to add a little bit of a darker shade because she does have a nice summer tan right now, so I might need to darken it slightly from what I have here, but we're going to start with this one and see how it goes from there. Testing it a little bit will give us a base to know if we need to lighten it or if we need to darken it or if we need to add more yellow or pink or whatever it may be. I'm going to take a new paper towel here, test to make sure it's spraying out, and then I'm also going to hold this over here to block out from hitting anywhere on her clothing because it will do an overspray technique and you don't want to hit their clothing again. So I'm just going to do a light test on the skin with the color to see how it looks before I continue it on her. Another thing to note about the airbrush is that it should always be moving. When you're trying to do an even application of color, go in tiny little circles. Don't go back and forth in X's. Go in tiny little circles and just go around and around until you build up to where you want it to be. It's not so bad. Okay, so this actually looks a little bit warm on this area of her skin, which is pretty good. It's a little bit slightly darker than the under part of her skin, which is good. We want to go a little bit darker on top of the tattoo at first, then the next layer we do on top of there will be more of an appropriate skin tone shade. This will help to actually balance and cover it versus highlighting the problem with too light of a color initially. It is important too to keep your paints closed after you've used them. You don't want them to dry out. And now what we're going to do is, from a bit further away than we did before, we're just going to start spraying this directly over top. And you can see it starts to lightly build up and it begins to cover. Again, we're working in patches and we're working in layers. So if everything's not covered in the first pass, that's okay. We have more layers to build up from there. One thing you'll notice too about already existing tattoos, which is something that you can't do anything about, is a 3D level. So a lot of tattoos, because they are an actual ink that has been essentially cut into the skin, they do have a natural raise to them that you can't do anything about because that is 3D. If you were to get prosthetics to fully cover something, if it has a lot of raising, that would be the only real option as far as neutralizing the 3D aspect. But typically, if you're trying to cover up a tattoo, having the color neutralized is all that really matters. Unless it's meant to be something that is extremely up close, then finding a way to balance it in a 3D way will be helpful. But don't beat yourself up if you're doing it and you still see the 3D raise aspect. That's very normal. See, as I'm going to the side, also I'm protecting the chair. I don't want to put this all over the chair either. Granted, it's an easy removal, but it's an extra step you don't want to have to do. Now that we have the first layer down, I'm going to go ahead and do a secondary layer. And notice too, we're nowhere near as close to the skin as we were for the concentrated color correction. We're further away, so we're slightly diffusing the product more at this point. Sorry. And you see how it starts to build up. If you don't have an airbrush at home, a really good option for a really long, durable last to this would be to use your Skin Illustrator colors with the alcohol activated paints. Use that to do your color correction, and then use PAX paint on top of this. Now, PAX paint is a mixture of rubber mask grease and Prozaid, which is an adhesive that we've already talked about throughout the course. You can buy it pre-made, or you can mix your own with Prozaid cream, mix it together with that rubber mask grease. That's going to give you a very full opaque coverage that's also going to be waterproof and transfer resistant. So if you're looking for an alternative that's not airbrush, that would be the most long-lasting, durable option for you. And you can do it with hand painting and sponges. Imagine as if you were doing it with this, techniques you've already learned. So now that we have the first layer down there, what we're going to do is mix up a lighter tone that's going to be an exact match to her skin tone in this area to balance it out. Now over here, this part of her skin is pretty okay because this part of her arm is tanner than this part of her arm there. So when we're spraying this second layer that matches the skin tone down, we're really trying to match this lighter tone here. We're not going to hit too much over there because this blends fairly well in this area. We just need to lighten this to make this side blend a little bit more. Again, remember, in between, you want to clear your airbrush through with a little bit of alcohol. Okay, now that the airbrushes run clear, we're going to take a couple other tones to balance what we have for the lightness in her arm. Now before we used the color 6 on her, so I'm going to look at what we have here and probably do a mixture of 3 and 4. They both have a warm undertone to them, so blending these two together, that way it's not one flat color, will be helpful. And again, I'm going to be testing it kind of in this area of the skin to make sure that it matches before I spray over top of the color correction area. So I put mostly number 3, and then I'm just going to do a drop or 2 of the 4. Now because I put 2 colors directly in there, I'm going to mix them together. Remember to mix them, you put your finger over top of here and you pull back so that it bubbles and it blends the 2 colors together. You just keep bubbling it until you can't see a discernible difference between the 2. You can visually see when the colors have mixed. Give a little test on your paper towel. Okay, now I'm going to test over here, see how the color matches. It's important also to let the product oxidize. Oxidation just basically means once the product has a chance to hit the air, it can change slightly. So putting it on the skin, it may look good initially, but after a moment, it may warm up to the skin and look too orange or too dark. So letting it oxidize is a good test before just going straight in. All right, after oxidation, this does look like a pretty good mix and matches fairly well to her skin. So I'm going to go ahead and start filling this in right on top of that top layer here. Now remember, this isn't being taken all the way around. We only want this to go on the half of the arm that has this tone. Need to mix a little bit more color. Remembering the colors you used and how much of each. You can think too, like, note what you're doing, 6 drops of 3, 2 drops of 4. That'll help you in making the same color over again if you need to remake more of it. And again, we're just going to bubble to mix the colors together. I'm going to drop the PSI down a little bit, just so it has a bit of a lighter spray, and we get a more gentle flow. And you'll see too, I'm just taking this out slightly before and slightly after the tattoo also, just so it doesn't look like a stamp right in the center. It has a soft diffusion out. It kind of erases the harsh lines at that point and gives a more even blend. Now this is the point where you just keep lightly building up until you get to where you want it to be. Okay, now we've covered the tattoo. Now what you'll notice is that it's covered, but now it looks flat. It looks like one even tone, which is not actually accurate for skin tone. So what we need to do now to make this more realistic and more believable is we need to add some spattering into this color to bring it back to life a bit. So instead of using the airbrush from this, what we're moving on to now is using our Skin Illustrator palettes. So I'm gonna go in with our complexion palette. Get a little cup of 99% alcohol to work out of. And this is really where we're going to be using our chip brush. Remember this chip brush that I taught you how to make earlier on? This is going to be actually used to fleck different tones into the skin without giving one full wash. So it really is going to break up the flatness of here and give a little bit of life back in. So the first tone I'm going to add back in is a little bit of blue. Since we added a lot of yellow and warmth to it, we're just going to balance it back out a bit. And you want this to be very sheer. You don't want this to be a very heavy, opaque color, so really thin it out with your 99% alcohol to get a nice sheer coat. Now before I start flecking this onto her, what I'm going to go ahead and do is take a paper towel. I'm going to have you lift your hand up for me. There you go. And I'm just putting that right there as a protector. That way, again, we don't want this to overspray onto her clothing, onto the chair, any of that. And this will overspray much more than the airbrush will. So now that we have the product loaded on, I'm just going to show you on a paper towel and the method. So what you want to do is you're going to take your thumb and you're actually going to flick like that. That's going to give this really imperfect slight wash of color in a kind of tiny little dot technique to really just bring a little bit of imperfect balance back in. So you just want to do this all over. And you can do varying levels of opacity as well. You can do one that's very translucent. You can do one that's a little bit more opaque, just so it's not the same throughout and you have a little bit of variation in there. I like to do a tester on the paper just to make sure I like what it looks like before I go in on the skin. So remember, in the color lecture that I was talking about, is there are all of those different tones in the skin. Everyone has warm and cool tones to the skin. Some are just more prevalent than others. So making sure that there's a balance of all of these tones that you're putting back into it after you've totally flattened it out will give more realism and more life. Make sure to hit all the sides also. This tattoo kind of goes down a bit, so instead of just focusing on the front, we're going to make sure to go down on the sides so there's not a stripe that's left without. Sometimes it's easier just to lift the arm for them. Remember, you want to make it comfortable for the person sitting in your chair as much as can be. Now that we've got some blue, just going to rinse the brush clean with a little bit of alcohol. And then I'm going into a blush color, sort of a dusty rose to bring a little bit of different tone back in. Now this one you'll see there's little water droplets, but that's okay. Just take your finger and lightly tap on top of them before they have a chance to dry. And then it gives a little bit more of that imperfect look. Okay, now that we've added a little bit of red in there, next thing we're going to do is take a bit of a deeper, just kind of flesh tone, and slightly do the same exact thing. It's all about building and layering. So once you kind of get it to where you like, then you stop. That's the beauty of layering products down, is you work in thin layers and you build it up to where you want it to go. Then you're able to pause from there, look at the work and see how you like it. If you want more, you can add more. It's always easier to add to than to take away. So build things up softly and layer by layer, and that's where you get a really beautiful finish. This is one of those times that you may want to be wearing your glove for this. Because it is alcohol, it can dry your finger out a good bit. Or if you don't want to have the paint on your finger also, you could put those gloves on and it'll help to shield from that happening. I prefer without the glove just because I find it easier to control without it. Now that we've added the tone back in, the last thing I'm going to do to bring a little bit more realism is take the visible veins that she has, and I'm going to actually just intensify that a little bit more right on top of the work so that it doesn't look like the vein just stops. It's going to continue slightly in. Just mixing a little bit of the blue and the purple together with a medium-sized brush. We don't want this to be very opaque, but we do want to blend it. So I'm going right on top of the vein that's already visible and just lightly continuing down. Same with the other one. It's going to intensify what's already there a little bit, but that's okay because it'll bring a little bit more realism into the fake one. Now, veins are very super visible all the way through, especially someone who has more of a medium skin tone. Granted, with mine, you can see them all the way through because I'm much more fair skinned than she is, but it wouldn't make sense for us to draw a ton of veins in there because they're really only mostly visible up front here. So just a little bit. Again, the purpose is just to give the illusion as if the vein is continuing down. And this is just some clean. I'm going to clear it a little bit just to softly blend it away. And just kind of tap this down so you get it in a really sheer opaque level. So I'm just taking some straight alcohol, putting it right on top of the vein we did, and then lightly tapping it away. We don't want to be blending because remember, we just did all this spattering technique. If we start shaking like that, then it's going to remove it. But if you just lightly tap on the area you're working on, it'll help you to blend through. So just shearing it out slightly with some clear 99% alcohol. We'll blend it a bit better into the skin. And give it more of a translucent appearance. The last step we're going to do is we're going to set this with a no color powder, and this will give us the longest wear time. Now you can just tap a little bit of powder into the puff here, and then a technique you can use is to just shake the puff like this just to load the inside up with the powder. That way you don't have to keep dipping back into. Then you can take this and just lightly tap. I like to use a rolling technique for this and just kind of pressing the powder into the skin as opposed to taking a big brush and fluffing it in there. The powder will be using the puff like this, giving you much more of a full powder look. Help to lock in and mattify for you. After you've powdered, you can go ahead and take a brush to dust away the excess. So you don't want to leave that sitting on the skin like that. And then what I'm going to spray on top is a mist of the Ben Nye Final Seal. This is an optional step, but it is a makeup sealant, and since we've powdered, this will also remove a tiny bit of that surface powder so it doesn't look too flat in that area and then have a glow everywhere else. This will also make it last longer for you, so all the tricks that we've done have made it the most durable level that it can be. And then that's how you cover a tattoo. Now when you're working on a tattoo with color, for example, if you were to be covering this tattoo right here, think of your color wheel again. So the black outline would have to be colored in with that same coral adjuster. When you work on this red area, you would have to put green right on top of there. When you work on the yellow area, you would have to put a violet in there. When you get to the blue, you would have to use a red. Or when you get to the green, you would have to use a red to neutralize. When you get to the blue area, you have to use an orange. And then when you get to the violet area, you have to use a yellow. So that's where that real color theory is going to come into play, is when you have something with full color that you're trying to neutralize. So not always are you going to use just the coral adjuster to do one flat surface. It's dependent upon what you're using. In today's world with technology, there is a kind of cheat sheet that you can use when you're first starting out and getting used to color theory. For example, if you were trying to color correct either of these tattoos here, you could take a photo of them and insert them into Photoshop or some other sort of photo application. And what you would want to do is invert the color. When you invert the color, it will show you the actual opposite of that color, so you see exactly what color you're meant to put on these areas and where it's meant to go. This will give you a better understanding if you're a little bit confused about color theory at first, and eventually the more you do it, you'll connect to seeing, okay, red goes on green, violet goes on yellow, and so and so.